Hey everyone, welcome back. So in our last explainer, we really dove deep into the book of Revelation, right? We laid out the timeline using its own structure, the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. But today, we're going to zoom out and get the full picture. We're going to build a detailed chronological map of those final 7 years. But this time, we're syncing up Revelation with the prophecies in the book of Daniel and Jesus' own words in the Olivet Discourse. Let's get started.
So, this is the big question, isn't it? How do all these incredible visions and prophecies actually fit together into one single timeline? Because when you're reading these books, the events can feel, well, almost chaotic. It's like a whirlwind of symbols and judgments, and honestly, it's pretty easy to get lost. But what if there's a key? What if there's a prophetic scaffold that brings order to all of it? And here it is. The key is tucked away in the book of Daniel. It's this prophecy of the 70th week, a 7-year period that acts as the chronological backbone for literally everything else. Just think of it like the master timeline that all the other prophecies clip onto. Once you grasp this structure, the entire story really starts to make sense.
Okay, so let's unlock this timeline. You gotta understand, this 7-year period isn't just a random block of time. Nope, it's a single unified story arc. It's a story that moves from this incredible global deception to absolute total dominion. And the whole thing pivots on one critical moment right in the middle.
This right here lays out the basic architecture of the whole 7 years. See how it's split into two very distinct halves? The first phase is all about religious deception, and it's personified by this figure called the harlot. She represents a corrupt, global religious system. The second phase, though, shifts to straight-up political totalitarianism under a ruler we know as the beast. And that lightning bolt's in the middle? That's the midpoint crisis, the dramatic pivot where absolutely everything changes.
So let's start at the beginning. How does this final 7-year period actually kick off? You know, it's not with a bang. It's more like a handshake.
Daniel 9:27 tells us that this week begins when a leader confirms a covenant or a treaty with many. This act creates this illusion of global peace and security, and this lines up perfectly with the rider on the white horse from the first seal in Revelation. You know, the conqueror, who uses diplomacy and the promise of peace to gain power. But it's a false peace. It's not going to last. Now, during these first 3.5 years, the world isn't ruled by some single dictator. Instead, it's heavily influenced by this global religious coalition, the harlot. Notice how she's positioned here, riding the beast. She's the one guiding the political powers, not being crushed by them. Yet. The leader who will eventually become the beast, often called the Antichrist, is actually operating inside this system at first. And what's really wild is that during this time, sacrificial worship is up and running in a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem.
And now we come to it, the crucial turning point. The midpoint of this 7-year period isn't just a date on the calendar. It's a perfect storm where events in heaven and on earth all converge, and it leads to this incredibly dramatic transfer of power.
Just look at how all these forces collide. This is not one isolated event. It's a clustered crisis. You've got a major shift in the heavenly realm, something dramatic happening in Jerusalem, the total collapse of the global religious system, and the rise of a single political ruler. It's nothing short of a perfectly coordinated, multidimensional coup. Okay, let's break this pivot down step by step. It all starts in the heavens. Revelation 12 tells us Satan gets cast down to earth, and he is furious. This event seems to be the trigger for all the chaos on the ground. The two powerful witnesses prophesying in Jerusalem, they're killed. Then the global religious system, the harlot, is suddenly and violently destroyed by the very political power she used to control. And with his religious competition out of the way, the beast makes his big move. He stops the temple sacrifices and seizes absolute, uncontested global power.
This table really sums up the complete regime change. I mean, look, before the midpoint, power is kind of spread out. Satan has access to heaven, the harlot rules through religious influence, sacrifices are happening, and governance is more of a coalition. But after that pivot, everything consolidates, everything hardens. Satan is confined to earth, the beast demands worship for himself, sacrifices are shut down, and government becomes brutal totalitarianism. The entire spiritual and political landscape is transformed practically overnight.
But here's something that's so important to understand. The regime changes, but the evil just changes its form. The immorality that the harlot promoted with world leaders, that just becomes state-sanctioned corruption. The persecution of believers that she was drunk with, well, that becomes an official, systematic war. See, the beast doesn't get rid of the corruption, he monopolizes it. He centralizes it all under his direct personal control.
So with that power transfer complete, we now enter the second half of the week. This is the 42-month reign of the beast. The mask of diplomacy is completely off, and the iron fists of totalitarianism is revealed to everyone.
This era is defined by one thing: absolute totalitarianism. The beast sets up total global control, and it's enforced through an economic system, the infamous mark of the beast, which basically cuts off anyone who's not a follower from all buying and selling. And right at the heart of his empire, the city of Jerusalem itself is occupied and literally trampled underfoot. But what about Israel during all of this? Well, it's not one single experience. This is really interesting. You've got three different realities happening at the same time. A portion of the nation of Israel, symbolized by the woman in Revelation 12, actually flees into the wilderness and is geographically protected. The city of Jerusalem, on the other hand, has zero protection and is occupied. And at the exact same time, the 144,000, a very specific group of sealed Jewish servants of God, are spiritually protected so they can continue their work. So Israel is persecuted, displaced, and preserved, all at once.
Now, the suffering during this period is uniquely terrible because it comes from two directions at the same time. We can call it a double affliction. You have this immense pressure coming from below, from the beast's earthly regime, and at the same time you have escalating judgments raining down from above, from heaven.
This basically leaves humanity caught in a terrible vice. I mean, from below, the beast is unleashing this relentless political and religious persecution. And simultaneously, from above, the trumpet judgments from Revelation are unleashing cosmic, demonic, and military devastation. There's literally nowhere to hide.
Okay, let's fast forward to the end of those 42 months and see how this all comes to a head. The beast's reign has a divinely appointed expiration date, but his downfall doesn't just happen in an instant. There's a final, really dramatic 75-day conclusion.
Right at the 1260-day mark, the end of the 42 months, the 7 trumpet sounds in heaven. This is a legal declaration. It says, "The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ." Now, this isn't his physical removal just yet, but it's a divine eviction notice. The beast's legal right to rule is officially revoked.
And this is where Daniel's precise timeline becomes absolutely critical. 30 days after his legal reign ends, on day 1290, the beast commits his ultimate act of defiance. He sets up what the Bible calls the abomination of desolation, a profound desecration of the temple, likely by putting himself there to be worshipped as God. And this act kicks off the final intense 45-day countdown to day 1335, the visible physical return of Christ. That final 45-day window, after the abomination is set up, is what both Daniel and Jesus call the Great Tribulation. Daniel 12:1 says it's a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. This is the greatest concentration of suffering in all of human history, as the final bowl judgments completely dismantle the beast's kingdom.
And it all culminates on day 1335. The 75 days come to a close with the second coming. What was legally declared at the 7th trumpet is now physically and historically executed. The armies gathered at Armageddon are defeated, the beast and the false prophet are judged, and earthly dominion is fully and finally transferred to Christ.
So when you zoom out, you see the entire journey, all on one coherent timeline. It moves logically from a covenant of false peace through the deceptive rule of the harlot to that critical midpoint pivot. Then you get the tyrannical reign of the beast, the legal end of his authority, and that final 75-day dismantling of his kingdom. The takeaway is crystal clear. The end times aren't a chaotic mess of symbols, but a coherent, structured, and divinely ordered progression from false peace to true judgment.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If prophetic history is written with this level of detail, with events in heaven and on earth synchronized right down to the day, what does that imply about the nature and purpose of all history? What does it suggest about the bigger story that we're all a part of?